Can everyone hear me okay? I'm doing this on a different computer, so bear with me. I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. Hopefully, I will have a new laptop by next week, one that actually doesn't just crash on me before shows every time. But I hope everyone's doing well, and thanks as always for joining me. I believe this is episode 67. Can you guys hear me better now? Yeah, like I said, this is a different computer, and it's not that great, but it was all I could do for the time being. Yeah, I'm definitely dealing with some lag. I think this is pretty old laptop as well, but like I said, by next week I should be set up with a new setup here. Hopefully, I won't be running into the same problems over and over. If it gets too bad, let me know, and I'll exit and then come back in. But yeah, I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. And tonight's our guest, I think he may have been on once before, or maybe it was on a different show, but I know he had a conversation with Jim Mike at some point. I don't remember if it was on this or when he was on his other show. But I'm gonna bring him in. We'll be talking about belief and what his particular ideology is, and why he believes what he believes, and kind of comparing and contrasting worldviews. And so it should be for a good conversation. So I'm going to bring Matt in now. Let's see. Hey, Matt.
What's going on, guys? People, everybody.
Thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, no problem.
But yeah, I'm glad everything worked out now. So I don't know too much about you. I know that maybe give the audience a little bit of background, like what it is that you believe and how you've come to holding these beliefs.
Gotcha. My name is Matt. When I was 18 years old is the first time I experienced what I would call God. And before that, I didn't know anything about Jesus or anything like that. And I basically just had these experiences. And after years of being separate from that church that would take place in, I then had the experience again, which drove me into a religious thing where I read the Bible multiple times. And my belief was basically Calvinism. And 3 years ago, I then had this experience again. And then I realized that Calvinism isn't. Basically, people say they hear the voice. He spoke basically 3 words and destroyed my entire ideas and theology. And then I came into another understanding of a different view of Jesus and God. So what I believe now is I've also seen things in the Bible that completely are opposite to one another. And most people don't see those things in the Bible. And we can go over that if you'd like. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm at the point now where it's like I can claim that I don't really know anything. But I believe because of what I experience, which is beyond what I can imagine me possibly doing on my own, in a sense, if that explains it.
So, I mean, let me start out by just saying, I do appreciate that honesty. I think it's not common to find someone who calls themselves religious to also acknowledge that they don't know anything. I think that, and I'm kind of on the same perspective as far as I think the only thing I can be certain of is that I exist. Then everything else is sort of more like a tentative. Like, I think I'm justified in these beliefs because of these reasons, but I would not claim certainty about those beliefs.
That's perfect. Yeah.
I do wonder. You mentioned that you're able to see these contradictions. Tell me what the process was like, and what did finding those contradictions lead you
I
to
didn't even
think
have a
about.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I didn't even have a Bible in front of me. Like, this is part of the experience I had, where I started to realize things. And like, it just popped out in my head. Like, would you like an example of one of these opposites?
Yeah, that'd be an example. Yeah, an example of the opposites, and
So in Luke,
an example maybe more in details the experience itself.
uh, the ex- that's hard to explain, man. The experience is hard to explain. And
Sure.
I can explain it, but it doesn't mean you would believe it. You would have to experience it. Like, I was hoping to talk to J Mike again, because he talked about music theory. Right now, he believes this music theory because he's actually gotten kind of like a high off of music when he hears certain notes or something. He was saying in the last show I was in. But what if I was on the outside? I never experienced any of that. Like, I wouldn't believe in music theory because I don't know what you're talking about. When you say you hear this stuff and it brings a, like a euphoria or a sensation. So like, yeah, for me to say I experience and explain that experience would have no meaning to somebody. You see what I'm saying? But I can show you the opposites in the Bible that are blatant opposites. I think you're cutting out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I could. Sure. Sure. Go ahead. A little bit of a. Yeah, I think I'm. Uh, but no, but I heard everything you said. So um, opposite.
I can hear somebody, but it's
And then
choppy, and I don't
hey
understand it.
guys,
Oh, hey,
one sec. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, give me a minute. I think the laptop crashed. Hold on one sec. Is the audio on the phone okay?
Yeah, I can hear it good.
Okay, so just a minute. Sorry about this, guys. I think my other laptop may be good to go. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so I the last thing I heard was you talking about how what we said about music theory, and then you mentioning addressing the contradictions. So how about deal with the contradictions, and then I'll respond to what you said about music theory.
Okay, so Luke 4:8 is the scene where Jesus is in the wilderness with Satan, and Satan says, bow to me, and all these kingdoms will be yours. And he says, as it is written. So he's pointing to the scriptures when he says this: worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Now, this is our Christian motto, right? This is, we're like, you know what I mean? We serve, you know what I mean? However, Matthew 20:28, he says, I did not come to be served, but to serve. So that's an opposite of what he's telling one group of people to another. And if you pay attention to the Bible, he's saying one thing to his apostles and everything else, and then he's saying something else to the Pharisees. Like when he preached about hell, it was aimed towards the religious leaders, not the prostitutes and the tax collectors. In fact, he said they were entering the kingdom ahead of them. So yeah, there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible from the Old Testament to the New Testament. There's things like, God banished us from the garden, but in Deuteronomy 30:18, we have God saying they deserted him and they have forgotten him. So there's like opposites in the Bible. And justice. I mean, the way we define justice and the way God defines justice, I mean, you find it in like one verse, but it's right there. It's an opposite of what we believe it is. So those kind of things that I see now.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think those are good points. And, I think obviously there is some wiggle room for reinterpretation of these things, but I do think that every religious text has contradictions to be found, which is not surprising if you believe that these are written by men, right? And
yeah.
So as far as what you said about experience, I think is an important topic to address here. As far as we said about music theory, I'm a musician as well. I'm not very well trained. Like, I'm not going to say that I understand music theory the way Mike does, because I definitely do not. But I don't think the analogy from my perspective works, because aside from the fact that there is a science to music theory, there is a science as to why certain sounds end up being preferable to others, and how certain harmonies and melodies working together sound good as opposed to sounding bad, right? But there's no belief to be formed on music theory. It's like I can have an experience of a song that I listen to, and I can say that song appeals to me emotionally, or I like the sound of it. It's just there's no belief there. It's just a description of a feeling from what you're listening to.
Yes.
That is a very different thing from my perspective than having a sensation that somebody is communicating with you and then externalizing that belief as, like we said earlier, you can't imagine that this could come from your own psychology. But I don't see any reason to make that assumption. Like, I've had experiences that I would call spiritual, right? And I think people are having these experiences in all types of contexts. Some in religious, what they would call religious, and other ones not. But for me, that seems to point to a deeper principle, something that's true about our consciousness, not kind of the truth value of any one particular ideology. Like, you had an experience prior that led you to Calvinism, right?
Well, the experience prior to Calvinism had nothing to do with the theology or anything else. I was just experiencing something that was very, very, very enjoyable. And it changed me as far as I basically was an alcoholic. And then it wasn't like I didn't even know what the law was or sin was, but I just suddenly didn't have the desire to drink anymore. because I was already high off of whatever this was I was experiencing. And it followed me. Like, it wasn't like I left the church and then I was down. Like, it just, that's how I lived my life for a while. And it's when I separated from the church in my own head that's where the experience was. That's where it left, because of what I believed in my,
Right. And I mean, I want to be clear. I completely believe everything you're saying. Like, I don't want you to feel like I'm somehow dismissing the power of that experience and the fact that it
Yes.
led you to change. Like, I completely believe you there. And I've seen those changes in other people. I guess what I'm saying is that none of that to me points to whether or not the power of a belief makes its truth value valid. Like, I have been changed simply by reading philosophy. Like, and I mean, legitimately, like, my mindset, I used to be a very anxious person. I used to be afraid of life, and I read Nietzsche. I read other existentialist philosophy that even I didn't completely agree with. Like, there were things in those philosophies that I thought were wrong, but there was something about the experience of being of reading those things, the style in which it was written, the topics that they were addressing, there was a power to it that literally changed my life.
I know exactly what you mean. I don't deny what happened to you either. I mean, that's to me, that is not an unspiritual encounter that you had with these writings. Like, that's the same thing. We like, people say, you gotta, when they say Jesus Christ is the only way, they act like you got to get through him first. No. He already did what it took. And now that's it. You don't have to worry about these things anymore. They're already done. Therefore, just be. That's basically the idea, is what I'm saying.
But the problem that I find myself in when I'm talking to any person, not even just religious, but anybody, is that they want to justify their metaphysics with experiences that can't justify those metaphysics. Like, it is 100% true that we were both changed in different ways, that we had experienced something powerful that changed us in a really observable, empirical way. But what led to those changes? Like, what were the factors that made that happen? Is not something that we can know just by the experience itself. Like, I might feel, for example, this is a kind of a bad analogy, but I'm thinking off the fly here. Like, I know that I might experience cold, but I don't know all the inner workings of what's going on in my system.
Let me ask you this. These writings, they changed your mind, right?
Sometimes, yes. And other times, it wasn't so much.
Huh? That is the literal definition of what repentance means. Like, we think it has to do with this lifelong process of, like, turning away from something that God never accuses us of in the first place. It says it right there in the Bible. It's a change of mind, like change your perspective. These people were all about doom. Like, God hated them. They were trying to get them happy again, cutting up all these animals. Like, they had like a mindset of, we're screwed. We got to make it up to this guy. And then it was the prostitutes and tax collectors that kind of like walked away from that and just did their own thing. And when Jesus came, he wasn't accusing them. He was accusing the ones that were accusing them, because they had already kind of gave up on trying to please God. You see what I'm saying? Like, we have, like, the change of mind is what the Bible means by repentance. And when you come into a newer mindset, or like a renewing of the mind, it changes you. Like, that's, to me, that's spiritual. I mean, you see that in the physical world, yes, but I don't say supernatural, natural. It's one to me. Like
No,
there's
and I think that's a preferable perspective to have, as far as like I'm a monist too, right? Like I don't think that this idea of a duality between the physical and the mental makes any sense. I do think
yeah.
it's one thing, but what I don't think is justified is the belief that this experience, uh, that you are justified in saying that it had to come, and maybe you're not saying this, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly, that it has to come from outside of you, or that it came from outside of you, that it somehow brings credence to your version of Christianity. Because the reality is that you're going to, and I've met people of all religions, right, all ideologies, um, who had just as powerful experiences, but they have led those individuals to believe contradictory things in light of other people. So, like, you'll have one person will say, I turned to Islam and it changed my life, and I stopped drinking, and I stopped this and that, and I'm a changed person. Or you'll find that in an atheist, or you'll find that in a Christian, or you'll find that in a Buddhist. Um, None of those changes point to the metaphysical truth of any ideology.
I can kind of agree. Let me like an experience will change you.
Yeah,
How you interpret that experience is kind of up to you if you don't know what the experience was. So you might wander into something like, I almost became a Muslim. I before I became a Calvinist, I came in and they were telling me that these experiences I had were like of the devil and stuff. And I
sure.
believe, for some reason I believed them. I was already years out from that where I would experience. And so like I believed them. And that's when I got into the Bible. But then I started thinking, well, what is true? You know what I mean? Like I always had an idea about a God. I just didn't, there wasn't a Jesus in that. It's just, I knew I came from somewhere, and I had this idea that, like, you know, I would go to church because I thought it was his house. But nobody, I have a picture of myself as a baby in a baptism. My dad never taught me about God. Nobody ever taught me about God. I don't know. This idea must have came from very early on, but I wasn't looking for a Jesus. I was looking for a God, the higher being that apparently we all came from. And Jesus got thrown in the middle of that. So this experience and everything, like that with Jesus, like kind of led me to my understanding of, I really don't know. I really don't know. I can say I experience, but to claim that this is this person and therefore I have this book, like that's illogical even to me as a theist. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe that he requires anything from us. I believe that this is supposed to actually happen naturally, because when we look at the universe and energy and the quantum entanglement, like all this stuff is just happening. We don't have to aid it along. You see what I'm saying? And that's what I've come to realize, is that life is, see, some people call it the kingdom of heaven, some people call it the kingdom of God. John, he just called it life. This whole life is just a natural occurrence. Like we experience this life. It's when we put our minds in places that I don't know how to explain that. Like if you take it from the garden, there was no, the knowledge of good and evil was added to them as a metaphorically thing. What was the knowledge before that? Well, if it was God and God is love, then that's what they had. When they added the knowledge of good and evil, that kind of messed up everything. Now we're pointing at everything we think is evil. Well, this person doesn't think it's evil, but this person does. And then we have a law, which is the knowledge of sin, as the Bible says. So now the knowledge of good and evil gets majorly twisted with the knowledge of sin, because now everybody's a sinner. You see what I'm saying? Like this is what religion did to people.
No, yeah. I mean, I obviously, you're not going to find me disagreeing there as far as the toxicity of ideology, especially religious ideology. But I think you said something that I think is the key issue here. Like, the experience is the experience, and then it's up to the person to interpret that experience. But I think some interpretations, and I think most interpretations that people arrive to, are unjustified. I
agree.
think, and again, no offense to you. I mean, you seem like a really nice guy, but
I'm not
I would say the
offended by
same
anything,
thing.
really.
I would say the same thing about your belief in Christianity, right? How you've interpreted your spiritual experiences. I don't think
I don't think I
justifies.
interpreted them though. I
What's
don't
that?
think I interpreted them. I didn't want to interpret them. I just said that's why I didn't want to interpret them. You know what I mean? That's my experience. And to interpret that, it's not going to be the same as somebody else's experience because
Sure,
we
sure,
interpret
but
our own experience, you see?
sure, but the problem is that I don't think that there are concrete grounds for you to make some of the claims you're making. Like this had to come from outside of me. Um,
No, I don't. I didn't say that. I
okay,
believe everything comes from within inside of us.
but you
Like,
think that but you do think that it is a path to God. You think that like you do interpret it in a Christian context, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't.
well, okay, so I would the thing is that we have language and like if I heard a Buddhist say shadow work, I might be like that's demonic, right? But the reality is they're talking about meditation, which is something I've done. So when we have different languages, it kind of, you know what I mean? Like I don't agree with that because and the language just cuts everything off. Like what you guys say and what you guys believe and with science and everything, I rejected that for a long time. Well, now I'm starting to listen and I'm like, this isn't really something that I should be rejecting. You see what I'm saying? Like, so I had a change of mind in that. And this experience caused that change of mind for me to say, maybe I can learn something from these people. When it comes to religion and the damage it does, I'm on your guys' side. The thing is that I don't know what they're called. The Christians that say that it's not a sin to be gay and everything like that. They're just like you guys. They don't like religion because of what it does. Like I would like to maybe show you guys how to combat these Christians with their own book so that they can. Most of the conversations I have, I get blocked. All right. They warn me I'm going to hell. And because I am blaspheming the book that they worship. So where's the God if the book is the God? Where's the experience within us or even outside of us if it just comes from a book? That's my point. They don't even have a claim for an experience, yet they seem to act like they know how to get into this presence or whatever it is.
Well, no,
That's
yeah,
my rant.
a few things about that. I think you are referring to progressive Christianity,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I mean, I agree that they are like us as far as like human rights are concerned. Though I do think that a lot of progressive Christians are kind of ignoring what I think is the reality of the text. Like
I don't think they are.
I think maybe that's definitely a conversation. Maybe we can bring you back on at some point.
I can give you one verse that shows you that.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so we take Jesus as he represents the true God, right? This guy came down to reveal God. Now, most people say, well, he's God, he's the true God. But John 17:3 says, eternal life is this, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, the one that you sent. Well, the verse in Tell is John 5:45. He says, don't think that I came to accuse you to the Father. Your accuser is Moses, in whom your hopes are set. So there's your two gods that people get confused about. Like, which God? Is he evil? Is he nice? Dude, Moses gave the law. And I'm kind of suspicious because he broke those first two tablets after he saw them worshiping a calf. We get the new tablets, and then we got Jesus in the garden or the wilderness telling Satan, or in the desert telling Satan to worship God and him only, which is the first commandment. I'm a little suspicious that maybe he added that to try to fix a mistake. You see what I'm saying? Like there's logical things you can see in there.
I am, for me personally, I don't have a, it's, how do I want to say this? I don't have a dog in the fight as far as scripture is concerned, because from my
you're in a good place.
From my perspective, it's not relevant because I think the scripture is the claim, not the evidence. So I can see how a progressive Christian can interpret the text a certain way. I can also see how more fundamentalist Christians can interpret the book a certain way. I tend to think that the fundamentalist is actually taking the scripture as it was meant, but I could be wrong. Like Mike is more of the expert as far as what the verses are. I mean, I've read the Bible, but I'm not particularly, like, to me, it's just not, I'm not interested
Gotcha.
so much in that. Like, I think it's important to use it to show the problems as far as like human rights issues and that kind of stuff. But to me, it's like, okay, we can interpret it however we want, right? And we can see what interpretations are preferable to other ones on using different standards. But to me, what is relevant is our epistemology. Like, how do we go from experience to belief formation and belief justification? And I'm yet to see a theist on any spectrum sort of be able to give me something concrete as to why the metaphysics that they've interpreted from their experience is justified. So, like you said earlier, right? You mentioned how you always had a belief in God, but it was kind of just general.
Yeah,
thing,
it
right?
wasn't. I didn't know anything. It probably came from somewhere before I even remembered, and
Sure.
but
And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with just living in a society that kind of assumes God is real, even if it's not. It's maybe we see our intuitions might be like, it might tell us, well, something had to create the universe, or like, people have those intuitions of design, right? And
I didn't think that way, though. It was a thing. So somebody must have told me at some point, and I searched for this thing.
Well, and I guess what I'm saying is that we have a lot of beliefs that are either passive or active, and maybe that was a passive one, that at the core is not justified to begin with. And so then if we have an experience and we have a certain psychological tendency to want to find patterns, and I think this is true for all of us, including myself, to want answers, to want to understand, to want to be free of addiction. And I don't think it's surprising that people will have a powerful experience and then tell themselves that therefore I'm justified in believing in Christianity, in believing in Islam, in believing in God in general. I understand why people do that. What I'm saying is, as someone who is ultimately concerned with what can I say is true, or what can I at least say is justified to believe in, I can't make that step. And it's not because I've lacked an experience. It's because even if I had the experience that you're describing, I would not interpret it in those terms, because I would find myself to be unjustified in doing so. And maybe that's partially my philosophical training. Like, I deconstruct what I experience to try to get the most, what I think is the most honest reading of that experience.
We all do that. You break.
I don't think
down,
most of us do. I don't think most of people do that, actually.
Here's what most people do: they break down this information and they put it back together in a way that fits their own reality. So if it can't go beyond what you already believe is real, and there's no, like people say, they open it up to possibility, but some people don't. They think, like, if I asked you, okay, from 1% to 100%, how convinced are you that there may be a God?
1%.
That's what I mean. Like, I'm probably 1%, or maybe even 10% that there is not a God. So we have different levels, or not 10%. Yeah, like I'm almost 100% that there is. So we have a different reality. Even in the Bible, it talks about two different types of believers. They got the spiritual believer and the carnal believer. And the carnal believer is more towards the law and everything like that. And the spiritual is more freedom from the law. And when you put the two together, you have a theology that looks like the fulfillment of the law, which is actually love, which if you love somebody, you're not going to do those things to them. So, and it's very easy. Like, we complicated everything about, like, what we see in the book. It's like, it's very simple. Like, you have a law that tells you have to hate somebody. Literally, that's what the law does. It causes you to hate somebody because you see them doing something that is against the law when you've broken it yourself. So the law was done away with because of that reason. It produced sin.
So I do want to reply to what you just said, because I think you're right. I think people, we do live in different realities as far as our interpretation. The difference is that I think, again, this sounds really condescending, but I don't mean it that way.
It's okay, man.
I think I can justify my position, and I don't think that you can justify yours. That's the problem. And it's
I
not
feel like
because,
I'm justified in mine if there is a God because he justifies my belief in him. That would be something I can't prove, right?
Right. So
yours is more logical.
Let me phrase it this way, though, because this is what I mean. Like, I mean, I would never claim, and I know there are some atheists who do this, and I will never be one of them, that I know there isn't a God, right? Like, and my lack of belief in a God is not out of how, some Christians accuse me of wanting to sin, or
no, I don't believe that at all.
And I didn't think you did, but of having some predisposition to being against the idea of God. Like, I don't like the idea of being commanded to do X or Y.
But it's understandable, man. Some of these people have been hurt by religion, so they don't want to have anything to do with that version of God anyway. But they don't know the real, like what I would call the real version of God. Like, I don't experience wrath, anger, fear, punishment, none of that stuff. Like,
but I will say that for me, wishful thinking doesn't enter the equation as to what leads me to believe in a particular claim. Like, if I was motivated by just my intuitions or what I want to be true, then I would believe in something like free will, right? Because I want that to be true. But that's not how I operate. Like, what I mean by justification is, like someone in the comment, this is what I was about to actually say the same thing. He says, that's not how justification works, mainly because it's completely circular to say that God's existence justifies your belief that he exists, so long as he exists. We can't know that these beliefs aren't coming out of the way your psychology is formed, right? Now, that's not to say that I know you're wrong, because I don't, and I could never know you're wrong. And I'm an atheist not because I've somehow disproven anything, because I don't think I need to. It's because I haven't seen any convincing evidence, anything concrete. And I don't mean proof, right? Because we can't prove anything ultimately, other than that I exist, or certain what we mean by proof when we talk about mathematics. But as far as like belief claims, I will be satisfied with concrete evidence that wasn't just that couldn't be just broken down by saying, well, it could just be their psychology. Like, I'm talking about sort of almost like a scientific approach to, okay, well, I have this belief. This is how I've come to this belief. Here's a framework that can make novel predictions, that has explanatory power, that is based on something empirical, at least to some degree, like maybe not in every facet of it, but something that's concrete that can be. So, in other words, that I can separate the imaginary from the actual in a way that is concrete. And if a theist can bring me that, then I would happily convert, because I would believe what I have good reasons to believe. But the individual interpretation of an experience doesn't do that for me. I don't think is a valid.
I don't blame you for that, and I don't disagree with the stuff you're saying. You know what I mean? From your standpoint, that is what you need concrete evidence, right? For me, this experience, although maybe not concrete evidence, led me into something that it led me into Christianity. At first, it wasn't anything religious. It was just I was going to get high at this church. And that's basically what it was. Like I would get, I can't, that's what I'm saying. I can't explain it, but it was, I got addicted to it. Like I longed for it after, even when I became religious, because I actually had this experience when I entered into religion, and that killed it dead, like completely. There was no experience after that. Sober minded, as people like to say. But, and I had a theology that I was absolutely certain in, nobody could break it. And then when this happened, I had nothing. So, yeah, I mean, otherwise I would be telling you what a lot of Christians tell you, that he chooses some for heaven and chooses some for hell. And
Right.
I'd be like, you're probably going to hell if you don't believe. But now I see Thomas didn't believe. 13 of the people he spent 3 years with said, hey, we saw him. He's like, oh, I got to stick my hands in his wounds. And he did. But Jesus didn't say, because you had to see to believe, I'm going to burn you in hell forever. He said, because you had to see to believe. Or blessed are those who don't see yet believe. But the thing is he says later, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see the face of God. If it can be seen, who do you think's going to find it?
Right.
Not the Christians, right? So you guys are looking for something. You're experiencing the natural realm. I've become fascinated with it. The only thing I have a problem with is I see different ways of explaining different things. I want to observe what they're observing, and I'd like to come up to my own conclusions, because my error came in trusting this book to teach me these things. And we can do the same thing with science, because we've had to go back to the drawing board before. So everything's a mystery. Even what I believe is a mystery. I don't feel like it's my job to figure it out. I believe that I'm just supposed to live in this, whatever it is, and not worry about it, or try to tell other people how to live. You know what I mean? That's just what I see. That's my philosophy, you could say, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm not against you guys. I would like to help you with this, because I do know the Bible very well, and I can kind of trick people into stuff because they don't know the Bible like they think they do. I can throw something completely opposite of what they're saying at them. How do you explain that then if it's an opposite? If that's what you believe. How do you explain the opposite to that?
No, and look, like I want to be clear. Like I prefer, I think, in terms of the effects onto the world, how you think about this, as opposed to a fundamentalist who wants to, stand with a sign saying that God hates gay people, right? Obviously.
Yes.
But I think at the core there is, while we're definitely on different moral spectrums.
Who, me and you?
No, you and the fundamentalist Christian. Like I would say,
different. I would be more like an atheist.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
like, I think that I'm much closer to you on in that regard.
Yeah.
And so I do think that we agree there, and we're on each other's side as far as that's concerned. But as far as how we come to justify our beliefs,
it doesn't matter to me. Like, if I can get these people watch this show, right? And if time and time again, you got these Christians on here getting angry and pissed off, and they're quitting, and they're like quitting the show, and the people watching are going to see, hold on, wait a minute. Like, these guys can't even have a normal conversation with people who aren't even getting passionate about anything. They start to see that. Maybe they start to question things. You know what I mean? Like, the questions I ask get people frustrated for a reason. It's because I know the Bible and they don't. And then when they see something they can't explain, well, then anger happens. Because now they got to question what they believe.
Right. And I think overall, I feel like I've actually been fairly lucky that most of our guests have been fairly respectful. I mean, there have been
that's a good thing.
Couple people that were pretty intolerable, but for the most part, it's been a pretty respectful project so far. But so, hopefully that stays that way. And I definitely appreciate people that, regardless of the differences in beliefs, can remain human and can find common ground. So I think all those things are valuable.
Yes.
But to me, it does matter the way in which people think and the consequences that it has on the world. Because I think, for example, you are luckily an example of your way of thinking hasn't led you to do violence towards other people. Like, you seem to be much more
Verbal violence
open-minded.
it has in the past. Yeah, when I was religious, man.
Right,
That's what a religious person does, man.
right.
They do damage to other people
But you are
because
not
they're
there
not
now.
okay with themselves.
However, on a level of epistemology, on a level of justification, I don't see much of a difference in terms of how you're arriving at what you think is true and how any religious person is arriving at what they think is true. Because I think fundamentally there is a mistake in the way in which you are interpreting what is evidence. You're interpreting what is just justifiable, or what is justification. Like, what is good enough for you to believe in something. I don't share that. I don't think that what you're providing is concrete enough for me to be like, okay, I believe in Jesus now. And I know you're not trying to convert me. Like, I know that.
That's okay. I really don't. It doesn't, dude. I'm not trying to force this on anybody. You know what I mean? I can't give you this experience. You see what I'm saying? Like, they say faith comes by hearing. I believe if people like kind of if I say God or Jesus, you have an idea of who I'm talking about in your mind, right? That you can't help it if you've heard. But the one most people have heard of is a toxic Jesus who's coming back to burn everybody. That's not, if you honestly believe that, if you don't believe, then you're going to burn it. Dude, that puts Hitler in heaven and Anne Frank in hell. Like, that's basically the theology a lot of Christians have. Come on, that evil repaying evil is what most Christians call justice. But that's not what God says. Show mercy and compassion one to another. That's what he calls true justice.
Right. Yeah,
but we see that in one verse, and then we ignore that, and we go ahead for everything else that has to do with killing people and blood and all that stuff.
I mean, like I said, I think morally, I think we agree on the toxicity of those ideologies. I wanted to show this comment, but knowledge is demonstrable to others who can independently replicate the experience for themselves. This is not the case for supernatural claims. And I know you're not really even defining what you're saying as supernatural. Like, I think you probably think that all these things, if they do take place, would take place in a natural order.
Yeah, I believe so.
And I think that's fine. But I think the problem remains that I think ultimately how you've interpreted your religious experience from an atheist perspective is not going to be justified.
What was religious about my experience? Basically, I was sitting in a chair, and then this started to overcome me. And of course, I roll with it because it's, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? Like, people seek drugs for this kind of stuff. And here I get to live in it for a while. And then it comes down a little bit. But then all of a sudden, like, all these things just start becoming clearer in my mind. Basically, what I've come to realize is that the atheist actually looks more like Jesus than the Christian.
Right.
Do you ever notice that? What did Jesus do? He stood in the way of the Pharisees accusing the prostitutes and tax collectors, and then he accused them. So isn't that what the atheist does? Don't they stand up for like LGBTQs and like victims of abortion? Like, so why is that different than what Jesus did? You call him a man, but look what he was doing. Same thing you guys are doing.
I mean, I do think that
I noticed.
I think that's true to a point. I think there are points, there are verses that, it depends on how you're interpreting what he's saying, right? Like, if
it depends on who he's talking to too. If he's talking about hell, look who he's talking to. He's not talking to the outcasts of society who've been thrown out by the religious leaders. He's talking directly to the religious leaders. He's basically basically what he's saying is religion itself is hell. Nothing shuts the gate. Dude, the Bible says the gates of heaven never close. And here we got people shutting the gates, telling people how to enter in these gates when they've never entered into them themselves. If you had this experience, it was a heavenly experience. So therefore, you've already entered, but try to interpret that, tell other people how to get in. You didn't do anything to get in. It happened. That's
I
it.
would say that I think, I, at least from my reading, and I think to some degree, like when I first read the Bible, I wasn't an atheist. I was an agnostic, right? I didn't go into any kind of expectation. If anything, I actually went into it at least with the expectation of liking Jesus as at least the character, right?
Yeah.
And I think to some degree I did, but there were things that I found that I don't necessarily buy into this super rosy picture of who Jesus was, as it's like justice, everything's love. And maybe you're not saying that to that
Depends on who
degree.
he's talking to.
Right. Doesn't matter who he's talking to, right? But
He flipped over tables, man, and whipped
right,
people.
right, right.
But they weren't the ones they were calling sinners. They were the people that were calling them sinners.
And I do also think that it's all about metaphor too. Like when he's saying that he's the way, is he being narcissistic? Like he thinks that he's actually God on earth, or is he
No.
saying love is the way to find peace and happiness? And he's talking about it in a metaphorical way. Like all these things. Again, this is why I said what I said earlier, right? Like to me, ultimately, the books don't matter, because I think what matters to me is what we can justify using science, what we can justify using the scientific method and philosophy and logic and things that can at least help us move from the imaginary and the possible to the concrete and the actual.
So what you call imaginary, like I believe, like when you said you read philosophy and it opened you up, like it opened your mind up to something. Was it new? Like something new, like a different idea, like
Yeah, for
something
sure.
more positive, you could say. I
So
believe.
let me clarify. By imaginary, I don't mean necessarily like a delusion. What I mean by imaginary is an idea. Like, how
Okay.
do we move from something imagined that maybe could be true, could be the case, out of just like an epistemic technicality where like anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
But how do we move from that possibility to something actual that we can say we're justified in actually holding this belief?
I don't
And
have to be justified. Like I said, I'm not trying to justify myself in what I believe.
right.
I'm trying to
So
like
for
give
me,
you
I
my
am. That's the thing. That's the
what's that?
difference, right? Like the philosopher, at least from my perspective, I am trying to justify my beliefs to myself, if anything else.
Okay.
I am always in the process of deconstructing and looking at myself in the mirror and seeing, I hold these beliefs. Are these beliefs justified in light of my experience, in light of the tools I have, whether it's science, logic, my intuitions, my experience, my interaction with the world, my interactions with others? Um, I Because I think that is what's necessary uh, for intellectual honesty. I think that's what's necessary for um, being able to say, I think that my picture of reality actually has a concrete basis. That I don't just believe in this thing. I have good reasons to believe in this thing. And I think most people don't care about that. I think most people, especially fundamentalists and people who are embedded in the religion, um, they have certainties that they can't get off the ground.
I'm interested in knowing what you know. Like that's the thing. That's where I'm at now. I believe the
Right.
physical can actually show us a lot of different things. You know what I mean? There's so many things that happen beyond what we can explain. Medical science and all these other things, they happen. We like maybe possibly there's a natural explanation for them. I'm okay with that. Like I said, the two are one to me. I had this idea that the supernatural world and the physical world is like I don't want to be a part of this. And so the spiritual Christian, they won't have the desires that like most people like they would have before. A carnal Christian will shut themselves out of the world, but still have these desires. And that's why the religious are like they are, pointing out what everybody else is doing and not worrying about what they're doing. It's because they have it's guilt, basically. They believe God's accusing them and everything. So, but like when you have a theology that makes you realize that God's not accusing you, the thing is that it's like people who drink before they're 21 And then when they become 21, all of a sudden it's not as fun because it's legal now. That's basically how I see the law. It's like people were doing all this stuff because the law was in place. And when the law was fulfilled, all of a sudden it's like, we're not under this thing anymore. Then there's no guilt. You know what I mean? You could just be who you are. That's the message I get anyway.
Yeah,
I think I went off on the topic there.
No. I get what you're saying.
You do
I
that
think
a lot.
no, like I said, I think your interpretation of these things is a preferable one, as far as like your own mental health, as far as how you probably treat others that you encounter, as far as your openness to scientific discovery. I think all those things are great.
But you know what? You want to hear something funny? It's the Christians and like people like my family who are calling me mentally ill. See that?
Sure. Yeah.
But I get it.
So much
People don't experience this.
There's so much projection when it comes to, even not just even religious ideologies, but political ones and ideology in general.
Maybe people just don't think it's right for somebody to be happy for no apparent reason at all. That's the vibe I get.
But I think ultimately for me, it's like, if I care about what's true, then I think that has to fit a certain standard.
Okay.
That I don't think theists have met so far.
Okay.
I think when people want to say, well, my experience has led me to these beliefs in these metaphysics, there's a gap between the experience and the interpretation that cannot be bridged. And I think that's a problem even for non-religious people. I think even for atheists. I think a lot of people arrive at conclusions based on pure intuition, as opposed to actually going through the process of philosophy and deconstructing beliefs and all those things. So I think that's a mistake on all sides, right? But like I'm reading the comments, right? Like, I often get theists in the comments say, well, I've experienced God, and I know God is this kind of God, and I know that this particular religion is a true religion because I've experienced it and God has told me so. Like, I met Christians who are, toxic, right? Who we will both disagree with, but who are applying a similar epistemology to you. What they're saying is just the experience demonstrated their metaphysics, which I think is a mistake from the start. But I think ultimately, if we can at least find a way to work together to make the world a better place, to at least, if people are going to be religious, for them to be religious in a way that is less harmful.
Yes.
I obviously remain of the opinion that I think the more people learn to accept existence as it is, without believing what I think is unjustified, I think the world will be a better place. I don't think God is a necessary belief on any level. I don't think it does. I think that, like what you were describing, like how you stop drinking, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could have done the same thing without a belief in God. Maybe
possibly.
Maybe not. Obviously, I don't know, right? Like maybe
I don't think I could have.
maybe not. I'm not. That could be, but that doesn't necessarily suggest that the belief itself is justified, right? It could be. Sometimes something can work like a placebo, right? It can work perfectly, and it's still being.
I hear people say that all the time, but man, I've been healed myself, dude, and I couldn't explain it. Like the pain went away. I had a lump in my clavicle. I can't find it. It was getting bigger in the past years. Could that have happened naturally? Yeah, of course. Like I said, supernatural. To me, it's the same thing. Did a higher power do it? Why do I have to be concerned about that? It happened. You know what I mean? Why would I put all the, there's a reason why God's invisible, right? Because everybody's trying to claim him and what he wants from us. Maybe you're right. Maybe this whole just experience life thing and not worry about somebody trying to like shoot lightning at us every 5 minutes. Maybe that is life. You know what I mean? Like to have no worries. Like you say, cease to know, but you got a lot of knowledge in here. The thing is that it's to wonder is not a bad thing. But
no, I don't think to wonder. I think to wonder is a great thing, but I think to wonder can become problematic when people move from kind of the thought experiments or the pure wondering and speculating, which can be very fun and enjoyable, to either having certainties or having actual beliefs that cannot be justified in any way that's concrete, in any way that can bridge that gap that I mentioned earlier.
Well, that's to you. I mean, you need
Sure.
to see with your eyes. The Bible says, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard. Now, when I have these experiences, that's what I experience. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to interpret it. Like the thing is that if you have an experience, that's for you. You don't need to go telling people, and especially how to get that experience, because if they don't get that experience, they're going to feel like they're a failure.
But
when you
right.
basically did nothing for this experience, you might have walked into a church where everybody else experiences, and then you caught that experience. Because the Bible does say, if you believe, then out of you, from within you will flow rivers of living water. That's why I don't think it's outside of us. That's why I think it's inside of us. I think we have everything we have here, but we dump. And I don't even mean here. It could be here. It could be. The thing is we dump all these ideas in here, and like we don't know. Like we don't. Like I don't know. Like I did know. I could have told you I know. I don't know now. You know what I mean? Like, and I believe the Buddhists like have this idea that like if the divinity that is within us, it's not our job to define the divinity, but it's the divinity that defines us. And I also believe that if you fully know yourself, then you know God, because we are extension. We are like an extension of him, not an extension of him, but we are a what do you call it? A unique expression of him on the earth. Like our lives are never going to be the same as anybody else's. We are as unique as a fingerprint, but what we tend to do is we conform to a religion or a society, and there goes our identity, our uniqueness, and everything else goes with that. We can't even be ourselves. First thing to leave is the sense of humor when you become religious, right? Because everything's got to be serious now. Does that make sense? I fell into that.
That makes sense. Like I said, I think the problem is people most of the time from their experience then want to make claims about reality external to them that I think are not justified. Like
external as in what?
As in the reality is that God exists. The reality is that God is this way. The reality is that God wants these things. The reality is that I couldn't have done this or that without God coming into my life. For example, in the comment, right? Someone just wrote, God is present in the here and now, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and say, I know that that's not true. Yeah. But I'm going to sit here and say, demonstrate that in a way that goes beyond just your imagination and your feelings. That's the case, to good justifications that will convince me that is a reasonable thing to accept, and I'll accept it. Like I'm not in principle against anything being true. I'm open to whatever is the case. It just so happens that I, in all my time of talking to religious people, of studying religion, of studying beliefs, none of that has ever been brought to me. Anything that I found concrete and convincing to be like, okay, now it's reasonable to think that God exists. Now it's reasonable to think that God has had an impact in my life, or that I'm in communication with God, or that this spiritual experience was sort of a confirmation of God. I've seen no reasons to take any of those things seriously.
I don't blame you for that at all. Like you might look at me as like me believing that you have to believe in order to go to heaven, or
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't believe that at all, man. I believe so look at me, okay? I was religious, and I'm not claiming to what I believe now to be of my own, and he made me basically like an atheist. Only I believe, but your moral standards of how we should treat others and everything is the same. And the thing is that that's not how most Christians are.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying? So like when me and Mike talked last time, he talked about wearing each other's shoes. You know what I mean? And I believe that this, whatever experience has brought me into this, is how I can see through your eyes and what you see going on with religion and everything else. I see that now. I didn't see that before. They say faith comes by hearing. Well, maybe you guys actually do have faith, because faith is what causes you not to be deceived. You see what I'm saying? Like,
So I think that's a matter of semantics. I think it's how you define
maybe it
faith.
is.
Right? Like to me,
I was reaching
like,
on that one.
to me, faith is, as I understand it, is belief regardless of evidence. You know, some
I
people
don't see
might,
it that way.
some people don't define it that way. Some people do define it
Yeah.
as trust.
Trust. Yep.
But to me, trust has to be earned. You know, to me, I trust in something that, again, can be shown to be justified in a concrete way. Like when we talk about experience of God,
For your eyes to see.
but for even more than that, because if tomorrow I woke up, right, and I saw Jesus standing in front of me, I wouldn't jump to saying, oh, therefore I know Christianity is true, because I saw a hallucination of
Which
God.
Jesus? The Saudi Arabian Jesus?
But you know what I mean, right? Like it's not just about the eyes. It's sort of a complete methodology, which you know people call the scientific method, and also philosophical deconstruction.
Yeah.
It's a certain standard that requires real work to meet. You know, explanatory power, empirical basis, ability to make novel predictions, a mathematical basis, logical coherency, not making logical fallacies. All these things I think are necessary for me to say, now I'm justified in holding to this claim. And I don't see that on the theist side on any level.
To be justified in holding on to a claim, wouldn't that mean certainty?
I don't know, because I
You would
think
have to be certain to justify yourself.
Yeah, so I don't think
that closes off possibility, though.
I don't think it would need to be certainty, right? Because I don't think that the scientific method provides us with certainty.
Why would I need certainty?
Right. So I don't think so. I don't think it needs to be certainty.
So we're kind of even on this, right? Like
yeah.
I feel like I'm justified in what I believe. I can't show you, and like you're justified in what you believe. But like if I say I want to see quantum entanglement, you can't show me that, but by a diagram or maybe an article.
No, but the difference there, is that quantum mechanics, even in its strangeness, has a basis, both mathematical and empirical, an ability to make novel predictions, observations that we can make through experiments that maybe we don't see the Big Bang, right? But we see the effects that if you take this notion as having happened, well, all the data we find in our experimental level fits. That's not.
I'm starting to believe that myself, actually.
What's that?
I'm starting to believe that myself, actually.
Right.
That's why I said I want to learn what you guys know.
Right.
Because I do some things that I see correlate with like quantum entanglement, like energy and how everything moves in waves. Because like this experience is almost like you're vibrating. That's kind of what it feels like. So that would kind of go in with the wave energy. You know what I mean? Like, also we have energy which can't be created or destroyed. Well, that's what people say about God. Like I say, I don't put.
I would say there's a lot of confusion from all sides as to what those words actually mean in the science.
And then there's that one particle that apparently everything comes from, or life, or everything, or consciousness, or it's one particle. How do you get a book from one particle? If you're actually seeing God as a particle, where does all these ideas come from? I almost have an idea that what we're seeing in the quantum realm is inverted. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's an idea, though. I mean, that's not, I can't. But like, because we see, like when I see diagrams, I'm seeing like a picture that like of these two cells, and they all look different. All the pictures look different, but it's fascinating. You know what I mean? The idea that like these two particles could be so far away and simultaneously turn, and therefore faster than the speed of light, which is, there's nothing faster than that in existence, right? Well, that just shows us that there is no separation between these two particles. That's just an illusion.
Two quick
Or am
things.
I wrong? I could be wrong. I'm new, so
Yeah. So I do think that there's a lot of like probably your interpretation of energy and that and some of those language. I probably think that you're not accurate about, but I'm not. That is not my field.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: is it possible that this energy that forms everything, that's in every living thing, the Bible says God's in every living thing too, but is it possible that this energy may actually be intelligent and like know what to do and how to do these things somehow? Because it seems to
like
naturally
I
do
said
these
before,
things without our help.
I think anything outside of logical contradictions are possible.
Okay.
But I'm interested in, do we have reasons to actually believe that it's not just possible, but likely or actual? And I would say no. From my understanding, the answer would be no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we have good reasons to think that the universe or reality itself has some intelligence at its core. I do want to. I do want to add a couple things here real quick. The mathematical nature of reality is a possible signpost to God. I don't see why that would be the case. One, why you would connect mathematics to a notion of something supernatural. It doesn't really make sense to me. Also, I think to what degree math connects to reality is also ambiguous. Like, I do think that there's obviously, I do think that we explain reality in mathematical terms for sure. I am interested in understanding that relationship because I do think that there is a gap between language and reality, including math. Because we know not all math connects to reality. And so I think it's ambiguous there.
Can I jump in on that one? Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
I did horrible in math, so I don't know if it points to God or not.
I did terrible in math. I'm not a math person. Like, even with the stuff with science, like, my brother who's been on the show before, he's a physicist. Like, he can explain all of these things in detail. I'm an amateur at best. Like, I'm learning the details of these things as I go on. My sort of respect and trust in science comes from my understanding of what I think the scientific method is. That's not to say that I understand, and I am interested in the philosophical implications of certain scientific discoveries, like in quantum mechanics and so forth. Now, this question, we don't see the Big Bang, but see the effects. Can the same be said of the spiritual world? I've heard that type of analogy before, but I think it's problematic because scientific theories are not speculations. They're very precise um, models based on very precise math, very precise experimentation, with the capacity to make novel predictions. These are, it's not, it's about comparing ideas, right? Like, what is more likely? I could say, we know, for example, that people's psychologies are complex. We know that people's psychology can lead them to be mistaken of their perceptions. We know that memory is flawed. Like, we observe all these things. So it could be the case that God is talking to me right now. Or it could be the case that I'm schizophrenic. Or it could be the case that I'm interpreting something in a certain way because of other factors. I think a naturalistic explanation and a psychological one is always going to be more likely because it's going to come with a level of justification and concreteness that you can't get from kind of the religious perspective. By the way, if anybody else has any questions for me or for the guests, or in general, feel free. We're probably going to be closing up soon. We've been going for 1 hour and 15 already.
Can I ask one question?
Of course, you can ask.
If you need concrete evidence that you have to see or feel or whatever it is, doesn't that close your mind off a little bit on the possibility? Like, that's not 50-50 on the possibility there is and the possibility there isn't. You're leaning towards one way.
Yeah, I do think that, but that perspective is the end result of looking at what justification entails. It's not that I started off with necessarily one thing, any one specific thing, one thing, a certain kind of evidence, or one thing, a different kind of evidence. It was me being open to anything and then starting to study philosophy, starting to study epistemology, starting to study justification, and saying, well, one thing is to be open-minded, but it's another thing to have your mind set in a certain way to where now I have no way of contrasting what ideas are more likely than others, are more justifiable than others. So yeah, maybe I think certainly I lean towards certain things, and I'm less open to I don't think I could believe in something that didn't go through the verification of science on some level. And I don't mean, by the way, I don't think that every aspect of a theory needs perfect empirical proof, because that's not possible. Like, you're not going to find that.
You are open up to the possibility, and you've experienced that the mind can be changed by, I guess, revelation. Like when you read these philosophers, it was a revelation for you, and
Sure.
you saw it, and it changed your mind and the way you thought and your perspective.
But I will say that the difference there is that change. Nowhere in that process was I making or holding to beliefs that made statements about reality outside of myself.
That's the whole point. Like the reality is within us. Like the reality of God is within us. There's nothing.
But see, that's already a true difference, though, because now you're not just talking about you're talking about something external also being a part of you. You're talking about reality having a certain kind of feature that goes beyond just your experience. You are, I think, stepping onto a metaphysical realm that I think is beyond what happened to me, right? Like, to me, the main change I had was reading Nietzsche in the notion of eternal recurrence. The idea that, if we were to relive this life endlessly, would that change how we experience life, even our suffering? Is there a way to reframe how we feel about suffering in a new way? And for me, there was. But nowhere there am I making claims about ontology, about nature or gods or what's true outside of me or what's true inside of me. It's more just like it's easier now for me to embrace certain things as opposed to it was before. During the Middle Ages, there was a philosophy that naturalism wasn't opposed to theism, meaning that the supernatural and natural just reflections the same order of law of God. I frankly, I don't really understand what people mean when they say supernatural. I do think that theism and science are in opposition, not because the notion of God and the reality that science tells us is the case are in opposition, but because of what we've been talking about this whole night, right? Like how we justify our beliefs, how theism justifies its beliefs and science justifies its beliefs, I think are of conflicting methodologies. So, is there anything else, Matt, that you want to add?
I would like to ask you this question.
Yes.
So say somebody actually proved God existed. What would that change for you?
I think it would definitely reframe how I guess it would, let me say it this way. It would depend on what kind of God it was. I think that would be part of it. I don't think it would change how I think I behave morally at all.
I agree. I don't think it has to change anything. what, like
I think
said,
it would
what's
change
happening
some things.
naturally
I
occurs.
don't think that I would be the same person necessarily, because it would be new information. Like, it would definitely reframe some of what, probably a lot of what I think is true, right?
Do you think you would wander into religion? Maybe. Hopefully
Um,
not.
no, again, I think it depends on what God was proven to be the true
Yeah,
God.
that happens
Right?
though. People experience this. They delve right into the Bible, right? And that's where all these ideas come from. This is why people become, and then they got somebody telling them all these things. But just the experience alone doesn't give us any insight on theism.
But so that's what I've
It's an
been saying.
experience felt.
Yeah, but aren't you to some degree? Because I agree with what you just said. Like, that's what I've been saying, right?
Yeah.
But aren't you to
I
some
haven't been
degree?
disagreeing with you, I don't think.
But don't you think that when you say things like God is inside of us, don't you think that that is going a step beyond just the experience you had?
No,
To,
because God is self-revealing. Like he reveals these things to us. I wouldn't believe. Okay, so if I
so
ask you,
that's where we disagree. That's, I think, is the core disagreement between us right now. Is that you say that God is self-revealing. I don't think you can justify that statement.
unless he reveals himself to you, and then maybe in your own mind justify that, or you've
But you couldn't. But
experienced
I
it.
think even then, I don't think that we could know that that's what had happened. Like, we couldn't know that God had revealed himself to me, as opposed to me having a hallucination, or having a strong
Possibly.
experience, or having, no, even not a hallucination, but just being under a delusion of some sort. I couldn't.
I don't know. Like the thing is like you do believe that there's an unconscious or subconscious part of ourself, right?
Sure,
And it happens to be in more control than we believe it is.
sure,
It's where our thoughts originate.
right.
So let me explain the garden this way. You have the I am tree, and then you have the I am not tree. And it's the I am not tree because in their minds, you have to do this to become, right? So they eat the fruit, and then all of a sudden it's I am not. So we have these two trains of thought that go on in our heads in psychology. You're not worthy. You're not good enough. You're not this. You're not that. And then we have these other ones. I can do it. I believe in myself and all this. Well, let me break it down. Like if I asked you if you were a good person, you might say yes, right? And then as a Christian, I'd be like, well, you can't just be a good person. But Genesis 1:31 says, and God saw everything that he made and it was very good. You're just agreeing with what God says. In the Bible, it tells us we were deceived. God was not. So if he's saying we're very good and you're saying you're a good person, you're basically agreeing with him and they're not, because they're saying no one is good but God. Therefore, they don't agree with what God says about them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the two voices in our head, one's telling us we're good, we can do it. And also you could see it as right brain and left brain. Like you don't, like with imagination, like you see something, and it is our imagination. He uses imagery to show us visions and these things.
But again, but that claim, so that is a claim.
It's not a claim. Don't take it as a claim.
So you're just saying as a possibility? Is that what you mean?
It happened, but I don't say that it has to happen to everybody. I don't need other people to experience it. I mean,
but I do think
I guess
it's a
it's a
claim.
but what can I come up with for this claim? Like, there's no claim. It's just I experience. That's it. That's all I have.
But hold on. But I think this is the problem, right, that I'm running into, is that you had a change of mind. You had a change of living. You had an internal change.
And to be honest, some philosophies that I've read like actually help that along. So it wasn't just the Bible, like, dude, when we read something positive and it causes us to come into another state of awareness of ourselves, like in a positive way, I just consider that spiritual. Like, I don't consider that. I mean, yes, obviously, if you were observing the brain while this happened, you would see. It's like a radio controlled car. Like, if I didn't think they existed and I saw one, I ended up trapping it, I could know everything about this car. Well, this is the brain, the motherboard, and everything that happens to this car comes from this brain area. But we're missing something with the controller. And the thing is that I believe the person controlling is inside of us. It's our subconscious. It's our own conscious mind. We interpret thoughts that originate from the subconscious, and a lot of times, like, the things that cause anxiety and everything are in our subconscious self that we just shove in there because we don't process them or deal with them. You know what I mean? Because I've experienced anxiety myself.
No, sure, but no, and me too. And I agree with you that there's definitely a subconscious mind that influences the way we perceive the reality. But I do think that like I said earlier, there's a gap there that I think is not justified, and that you're not bridging. Where you go from.
That's fair.
I've had this change to. I mean, to me, it is a claim to say that God was responsible for this change. It is a claim to say that God is inside of you. It is a claim to say that God is part of reality. These are not.
I say I believe. I don't know if I claim. Like, I believe that that's what even the Bible's conveying. Like, this stuff I understand about psychology and human thinking. Like, I didn't study a book, man. This just
Right.
I just started understanding these things. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something it's something I believe. Like, I believe wisdom is in the unconscious. Like, we can actually learn from this other part of ourselves we don't know, you see. Right. But like I said, like, I don't want to claim. I say, if I say I believe, is that a claim? I don't want to be a claimer. You know what I mean? Like,
no, okay. I think that's better. I think
our language
limited. Yeah.
Like, here's another thing I noticed. I used to call atheists an atheist because that's what they want to be called. But in my mind, it's non-believer. And then I think a lot of times when an atheist calls me a Christian, they're thinking religious in their mind. You'd have to define religion, because I don't feel like I'm religious at all. I don't think I'm under any requirements or legal contract or anything like that. Like, he talked about a father and son relationship. So if that's what it is, you can cut everything else out of the book and you could just focus on that relationship and not whatever else theological hoops somebody else has you jumping through to get into this whatever relationship,
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to ask the audience, when I'm unmuted, you guys don't hear an echo, right? You don't hear Matt's voice twice. I hope that, because sometimes I forget to mute myself. I'm on my phone because my computer died on me. As far as this comment, transcendental such as universals like truth, beauty, love, and other Platonic ideas, identity over time, numbers, and all those things. Like, again, I don't think that. I mean, generally, I'm skeptical about universals as it is, but I don't think that the belief in God is necessary in order to believe in truth, beauty, love, and those identity over time. Like, those things don't get lost. And maybe you're not saying that, but those things don't get lost when you don't have the God belief in you.
Can I say something?
Of course.
I believe when you don't get all worked up about who God is and everything like that, this just comes natural. Like, you can't tell me the atheist doesn't love people. If they're standing in if they're defending the people that are being, like, having shit thrown on them by the religious people, that's love, man. Like, that is exactly what it's supposed to be. So you guys are like the organic Christian without even believing in a God, basically, because this is the message that was conveyed in the actual Bible. Love your neighbor as yourself is what he said. That's it. That's the fulfillment of the law. So you guys fulfill the law without even trying. Dude, Romans 2:14 and 15 explains this, that these people meet the requirements of the law without even having the law, because they're a law within themselves. You see what I'm saying? It's a natural thing to love. That is our true nature, I believe. We forget about our true nature. We have all these ideas that come in our head, like, basically religion, it caused me not to love. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think
it's against the law to love certain people in religion,
right.
But if it's for freedom that Christ has set us free, we can love absolutely anybody we want. We look at Sodom and Gomorrah and we're like, well, it was gays. No, it was gang rape. And the reason most likely is they prevented marriage, which is why you see what happens in a prison. You got straight men raping other straight men, but when they come back out, they're straight again. When you suppress these desires, they build up. And that's why we see these things, because these are natural desires, or I would even call them natural God-given desires. If I'm a homosexual, I don't choose who I'm attracted to.
Sure.
But you put a guy in prison who's straight and he likes women, well, that desire will turn him in a different direction. You see what I mean? If it's suppressed.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't study books for this. I observe. I'm an observer, I guess.
I don't know that I don't know that we have one true nature. Like, obviously, I do think, how do I say this? I do think we have one true nature, but I think it's multifaceted. Like, I don't think it's just our nature to just love. I think it is in our nature to love and collaborate and form bonds. I also think we have in us very destructive desires and
What
drives.
causes that, though?
What causes that?
Wouldn't it be the restriction of the natural desires?
No, I think in part it can be. I think I would say it's a combination of culture and biology. Like I think we all have, like at a certain point, it made sense that people had to fight for territory to survive, right? I think it's immoral, but it's what people did, and I think over time that we've evolved and our morality has evolved. We've moved away from those things, but some of that aggression is probably still present.
Yeah.
But
we're not as violent as we were. We would boil people
right.
alive. Now we put them in prison. Can I make a suggestion?
Mm-hmm.
So what was I had a thought. You were talking about how we progressed. I might have lost the thought. I'm sorry. It's a pretty
No,
good
it's
point.
no problem. Yeah, I was just saying that I think morally we've definitely progressed and
that's what I was gonna say.
What's that?
Can I offer you this? Like violence, rivalry, all these other things that we experience in life that we claim are evil. I believe our information is in our DNA, and this, like the Bible talks about, generational curses of your past generations. Like I don't believe in the word curse, and if there is a curse, we've been set free from that. But like that's in our DNA, I believe. The information that's in our own DNA, like that's why I believe like cultures live on and everything like that is because we have a natural tendency because of our DNA to behave. And plus, not only that, but we're around the people that raise us also. You know what I mean? Like you can take somebody with DNA and somebody else raises them, and they could either be like their parents were, or they could be maybe into a new, like not like their parents. You know what I mean? And it's very tricky to figure all this out because you could have two sons and one the father abuses the mom, and then you got the one who abuses the mom. Is why did you do that? Well, I saw my dad do it. And the other one doesn't do it. He's like, why'd you do that? Because I saw my dad did it. So we're all unique and different, I believe. But I don't even know what my point was. I just kind of sometimes.
No, I get what you're saying. I think I'm in agreement there.
So there was a point to that.
Yeah, I appreciate your time and your candor over these issues, and
I enjoyed this conversation. Actually,
yeah, same. I appreciate you coming on and talking with me.
I think I might agree with you more than you agree with me on a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think but I think it's valuable to find common ground, even with different, when you have different perspectives as far as how we justify our beliefs.
The only difference is I believe in a God and you don't. As far as morality and everything, we seem to be on the same page.
Right.
I wasn't like that before, and I'm like that now.
Well, I'm glad that you've come out of that toxicity into a better situation. Does anybody in the audience have any last questions before I close up here? If not, I'm thinking we'll probably do another show Monday or Tuesday. We definitely have some stuff in store that I think you guys would like. Again, if you guys want to support us, like and subscribe, and we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Axioms on Trial. And as always, thank you for everyone who supports what we're doing and comes in and engages in the conversations. I think it definitely makes this worthwhile. But Matt, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
And sorry guys for me having to do this on my phone tonight, but hopefully I will be having a new computer by next week. So all these issues that I've been having this entire year doing this will have been resolved. So
I don't think the phone took away from anything. I could hear you perfectly, and it was seamless. There was no
perfect.
Or anything.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna try to figure out how do I end this on the phone, because I've never done that before. Let's see. Okay, great. All right, guys. Thanks again. And
I cut out of this then after you hang up or whatever.
Yeah. You can just exit.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank
Like
you.
I said, man, I had a change of mind, and now I see your side of it, and
Sure.
I kind of came over to your side. It's just I can't lose that whole belief, you know.
Right.
Not a
Well,
claim, not a claim or justification. Just a belief.
I appreciate your honesty there.
Yes.
And actually, before I go, one last question: do you think there was anything that could change your belief in God?
At this point, man, I don't know, dude. I've walked away. I've looked at other things. I like what I believe about God, yes, but the whole belief in something that, like, I don't believe that we are apart from God. I believe we are in union with God. I believe the way you think looks like the God that revealed himself to me, and somehow naturally you've become into this, the way you see morality and how we should treat other people and everything like that. You don't even hate the Christians. You know what I mean? You're like, you don't want to make them look foolish. You just want to have a conversation with them
Sure.
and try to get them to convince you that there's a God,
Right.
which is almost impossible to do. And maybe there's plenty of people who have experienced and they're atheists because
Right.
they fell into religion and then they started seeing some stuff. And God, I believe God opens our eyes to see these things so that we do jump out of what's harming us. But I don't believe the two worlds are separate. I believe everything's one.
Well, like I said, thanks again for coming on and sharing your perspective. And,
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully we can have you back on at some point.
Yeah, it'd be good. Anytime. Just let me know.
Thanks again, everyone. I'll be back soon. So take care.